Most mornings begin the same way. The air is still cool enough to hold the scent of damp leaves. The light slips softly across the lawn, and somewhere beyond the fence, a blue jay announces itself before you ever see its brilliant blue feathers. It lands with surprising confidence, tilting its head as if it already knows this yard, this tree, even the quiet rhythm of the person standing just a few feet away. You smile without thinking. Maybe you break off a small piece of bread from the toast still warm in your hand. Maybe you've done it before. Maybe someone once did the same for you when you were a child, teaching you that feeding wild birds was one of life's simplest acts of kindness. The blue jay hops closer. It studies the pale crumb resting on the grass for only a moment before carrying it away into the morning light. Nothing about the scene feels unusual. Nothing feels dangerous. In fact, it feels exactly the opposite. Peaceful, familiar, the kind of moment that disappears almost as quickly as it arrives. But if you could follow that single piece of bread beyond what your eyes can see, if you could watch what quietly begins inside the body of that bird over the next few minutes, the story would become something very different. If you're new here, take a moment to subscribe before you leave, because what you're about to discover will change the way you look at every bird that visits your yard, and perhaps every small kindness you thought you understood. But that is only where this story begins. Because the strangest part isn't that the blue jay accepted the bread, it's what happened after the last crumb disappeared from sight. You probably know this feeling more than you realize. You see a wild bird pause just long enough for your eyes to meet, and something quiet inside you says, "I should leave it a little food." It is not because you expect anything in return. It is because kindness often begins with the smallest gestures. A crust from breakfast, half of a sandwich after lunch, a few forgotten crumbs brushed from the edge of a picnic table. They seem too small to matter, too ordinary to leave a lasting mark on anything. And when the bird eagerly accepts them, it feels almost reassuring, as though nature itself has thanked you. Most of us never question that moment. Why would we? The blue jay flies away looking just as bright, just as energetic, disappearing into the canopy with the same confident wing beats it arrived with only moments before. There is no obvious warning, no visible sign that anything deserves a second thought. That is why this belief has quietly passed from one generation to the next. Parents shared it with their children. Grandparents smiled as ducks and songbirds gathered for another handful of bread. It became less of a choice and more of a tradition, woven into memories of quiet mornings and peaceful afternoons outdoors. There is something deeply comforting about believing that helping wildlife can be that simple. Perhaps that is why so few of us ever stop to wonder whether the bird experienced that moment differently than we did. And that is where the story begins to shift. Because sometimes the greatest misunderstandings are not born from carelessness. They are born from kindness that has never been asked to look a little deeper. Now imagine following that blue jay just a little farther, beyond the fence line where it disappears into the branches of an old oak. From the outside, nothing has changed. The morning is still quiet. The breeze still moves through the leaves. The bird settles onto a sturdy limb, turns the piece of bread once with its beak, then swallows it in only a few quick movements before lifting its head to scan the yard again. If you were watching from below, you would think the story had already ended. But for the bird, it has only just begun. Hidden beneath those bright feathers is a system refined by countless generations, designed not simply to fill an empty stomach, but to turn every meal into exactly the fuel a wildlife demands. Every seed, every acorn, every beetle, every caterpillar carries something different into that delicate balance. The bird does not pause to calculate any of it. It relies on instincts shaped long before neighborhoods, sidewalks, or backyard feeders ever existed. That is the hidden layer most people never see. A blue jay is not only choosing what it can eat, it is constantly negotiating what its body was built to expect from the world around it. And sometimes those two things are not the same. There is something quietly remarkable about that. A bird can appear perfectly healthy in the moment, while carrying the unseen consequences of choices repeated day after day. Nothing dramatic announces the difference. No obvious signal reaches the human eye. Only the silent work of a body, responding exactly as nature designed it to. And this is where the ordinary begins to reveal something far more profound. Because what happens next cannot be understood by watching the bird from the outside alone. Researchers who study wild birds have learned something both simple and surprisingly easy to overlook. A bird does not measure a meal by how full its stomach feels. Its body measures a meal by what that food can become. For a blue jay, every hour of the day demands remarkable precision. Flight alone requires an extraordinary amount of energy, while growing healthy feathers, maintaining muscles, supporting the immune system, and preparing for changing seasons all depend on nutrients that nature usually provides through seeds, nuts, insects, and other wild foods. Bread offers energy, but very little of the protein, healthy fats, vitamins, and minerals that these natural foods quietly deliver. Wildlife biologists sometimes describe foods like this as filling without truly nourishing, a difference that is almost invisible in the moment, but becomes meaningful over time. That is why the morning still appears peaceful. The blue jay does not suddenly become weak. It does not stop singing. It simply continues with its day, carrying inside it a meal that satisfies hunger far more than it supports the demanding life it was designed to live. There is something deeply humbling about that realization. The bird never intended to make a poor choice. Neither did the person who offered the bread. Two lives briefly crossed through an act of kindness, yet nature continues to follow its own quiet rules, unchanged by good intentions alone. Perhaps that is why the healthiest yards are not built only on generosity. They are built on understanding. And once you begin seeing food through the eyes of the bird instead of your own, even the smallest crumb resting in your hand begins to tell a completely different story. The next morning, the blue jay returns. Not at exactly the same second, but close enough that you begin to notice a rhythm. It lands first on the weathered fence post, then the lower branch of the maple, pausing only long enough to watch the yard wake up. Before long, you find yourself looking toward that branch without realizing it. Coffee in one hand, the morning still wrapped in silence, you catch yourself wondering if it has arrived yet. The bird has not changed overnight. You have. This is how quiet relationships with wild things often begin. Not through grand moments, but through repetition, so gentle it almost escapes your attention. Researchers have found that blue jays are remarkably observant, remembering reliable food sources and recognizing patterns in the places they visit. They learn, and without intending to, you have become part of that routine. There is something deeply moving about being included in the daily map of a wild creature. It does not know your name, it does not understand your worries or your plans for the day, but it recognizes the familiar shape standing near the porch each morning. The slow movement of a hand, the place where food sometimes appears. That quiet trust feels like a gift. Perhaps that is why changing what you offer can feel unexpectedly difficult. We tend to believe that love is measured by consistency, by giving the same thing day after day. Yet nature quietly suggests something different. Sometimes the kindest way to honor trust is not by repeating yesterday's habit, but by learning what the one who trusts you truly needs, even when neither of you can say it out loud. Days become weeks almost without you noticing. The mornings continue their quiet rhythm, and the blue jay continues to appear, gliding through the same patch of sunlight, before settling onto the same familiar branch. It still looks healthy. Its feathers still catch flashes of blue and white whenever it turns toward the light. Nothing about its appearance asks for concern. That is what makes the deeper story so easy to miss. Nature rarely announces gradual change. It whispers through repetition. Wildlife researchers have long observed that birds naturally return to places where food is predictable, because every successful meal reduces the risk of wasting precious energy searching somewhere else. The habit itself is not the problem. The problem begins when a reliable food source slowly replaces the richer variety that a wild landscape once offered. A few extra crumbs today become an expected stop tomorrow. Another easy meal replaces another trip beneath the oak leaves, another search through rough bark, another insect quietly overlooked. The shift is almost impossible to see from the porch. Yet inside the life of the bird, its daily map begins to redraw itself one small choice at a time. There is something quietly profound about realizing that even kindness can reshape the paths of another living creature. Not through force, not through fear, simply through consistency. And perhaps that is true far beyond the birds that visit our yards. The things we offer, and the things we repeat, slowly become part of someone else's world, without either of us fully realizing it. But the story does not end with a single blue jay. Because once one bird changes its routine, something even larger begins to unfold across the entire yard, and that is the part almost nobody ever notices. After a while, the yard begins to feel different, even though almost nothing about it has visibly changed. The maple still sways in the morning breeze. The fence still catches the first band of sunlight. The blue jay still arrives with the same confident call that echoes through the branches. Yet if you sit quietly enough, another realization begins to settle beside you. The yard was never simply a place where birds found food. It was part of a living conversation, one that had been unfolding long before you stepped outside with your morning coffee. Many people believe that caring for wildlife is less about feeding animals and more about learning to participate in the rhythm they already follow. Whether that feeling is spiritual, deeply psychological, or simply the result of paying closer attention, something about it feels difficult to ignore. The choices we make ripple outward in ways we rarely witness. A handful of sunflower seeds scattered beneath the oak may nourish not only the blue jay, but the insects beneath the leaves, the squirrels that gather fallen shells, and even the young trees that quietly benefit from forgotten acorns carried away and buried months before. Nature has always worked through relationships that seem almost invisible until someone pauses long enough to notice them. Perhaps that is why moments like these linger in memory. Not because they prove something extraordinary, but because they gently remind us that we have never been separate from the quiet world unfolding just beyond our door. And once that thought takes root, another question naturally follows. If something as small as changing a single morning habit can quietly reshape the life of one bird, what might happen when that small act is repeated through every changing season that follows? The next morning feels almost unchanged, yet you notice something you had never noticed before. You do not reach for the bread automatically. Instead, you stand quietly on the porch as the first light settles across the grass, listening to the soft rustle of leaves before the blue jay appears. It lands in its familiar place, pauses, and looks across the yard with the same calm patience it always has. For a brief moment, neither of you moves. It is remarkable how much can be shared in silence. You realize that caring for a wild creature has never been about making it depend on you. It has always been about helping it remain beautifully, unmistakably wild. So this morning, your hand opens differently. A few unsalted peanuts still in their shells rest beneath the maple. A scattering of black oil sunflower seeds catches the early sunlight. Nothing dramatic happens. There is no sign announcing that you made the right choice. The blue jay simply studies the ground, hops forward with quiet confidence, and chooses what generations before it were meant to recognize. Watching that small decision unfold feels strangely peaceful. The air seems a little lighter. The distance between you and the bird feels both real and perfectly appropriate. Trust does not always mean coming closer. Sometimes trust means allowing another living thing to remain exactly what it was created to be. As the blue jay disappears once again into the trees, carrying something far more natural than yesterday's offering, you find yourself smiling for a different reason. The morning has not become more extraordinary. You have simply begun seeing it with different eyes, and somehow that changes everything. By the time the sun slips behind the trees and the yard settles into evening, it becomes difficult to remember that this story began with something as ordinary as a piece of bread. What remains is not a feeling of guilt. It is something quieter than that, awareness. You begin to understand that every small choice you make becomes part of a much larger story, one written not only in your own life, but in the lives of the wild creatures that have learned to share this place with you. The blue jay will probably return tomorrow. It will still arrive with the same bright feathers, the same sharp eyes, the same confident call echoing through the morning air. It will never know why the food waiting beneath the maple changed. It will never know that someone stood on a porch one quiet morning and chose understanding over habit. But perhaps it does not need to know. Nature has never depended on recognition. It responds only to what is real. Many people spend their lives searching for profound signs, wondering whether the natural world is trying to speak to them. Perhaps, sometimes, the message is much simpler. Perhaps the greatest conversations with nature begin the moment we stop asking what it can give us and begin asking what it truly needs from us instead. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If stories like this help you see the living world with quieter eyes, I hope you will subscribe before you leave, because there are still countless wonders waiting just beyond the edge of what most of us notice each day. And perhaps, somewhere outside your window tomorrow morning, a flash of blue will settle onto a familiar branch once again. Maybe it will be only a bird, but after today, it may never feel like only a bird.